The stagecoach door swung open, and Sophia Wilson stepped into hell disguised as Arizona dust. The baby in her arms screamed. Emma knew before Sophia did that something was desperately wrong. No husband waiting, no future standing at that depot. Just empty desert and a driver's cruel words. Anderson's gone lady, sold out months ago. 23 years old, holding an orphaned child with $3 to her name and a wedding dress in her trunk that would never be worn. This was how dreams died in the West. Before we begin this journey together, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Stay with me until the very end of this story. I promise it's worth it. And comment below with your city name so I can see how far Sophia's story has traveled across the world. Now, let's begin. The dust hadn't even settled when the driver climbed back onto his perch. "Wait," Sophia's voice cracked. "There must be some mistake. Mr. Anderson sent for me. I have his letters." "Letters can lie, ma'am." The driver gathered his reins. Frank Anderson owed half the territory, sold his ranch to pay debts and headed for California. Left about 3 months back. 3 months. The same week she'd written accepting his proposal. Emma wailed louder. At 8 months old, she'd already lost both parents to cholera. Now she was losing stability too. "But I came all this way. I sold everything." Sophia's throat closed. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of strangers who'd already written her off. The stagecoach lurched forward, leaving her standing in front of Cartwright's Mercantile, with a single trunk, a screaming infant, and complete destitution staring her in the face. "Ma'am!" A woman's voice sharp. "You're the Anderson bride." Sophia turned. A heavy-set woman in a flour-dusted apron stood in the Mercantile doorway, arms crossed. "I was supposed to be." Sophia shifted Emma to her other hip. "Do you know where I might find Mr. Anderson?" "No misunderstanding, dear. Frank Anderson was a drunk and a cheat. You're lucky you didn't marry him." The woman's bluntness hit like a slap. "He sweet-talked 3 other mail-order brides before you. 2 had the sense to turn back. The 3rd married him anyway and left 6 months later with a black eye and empty pockets." The ground tilted beneath Sophia's feet. "I see." Her voice sounded distant. "Thank you." "Where you planning to go now?" Back to Boston meant crawling back to her cousin Margaret, who'd called her a fool for coming west. Staying here meant what she had $3, maybe 2 nights at a boarding house. "I don't know." The woman's face softened slightly. "There's a boarding house 2 streets down. Mrs. Patterson might give you a few nights if you can work. After that?" She shrugged. Not many options for a woman alone. Emma's cries dissolved into hiccuping sobs. Sophia bounced her automatically while her mind raced through impossible calculations. "Thank you." Sophia bent to grab her trunk. "Let me help with that." A man's voice quiet and steady. Sophia spun around. She hadn't heard him approach. He stood a few feet away, hat in hand, tall, lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water. 30-something, maybe older. His clothes were clean but worn, his hands calloused. "I can manage." The words came out sharper than intended. "I'm sure you can." He didn't move closer, just stood there turning his hat brim in his hands. "But you shouldn't have to, not today." Something in his voice made her pause. Not pity, understanding. Emma let out another wail, arching her back. "Is she hungry?" the man asked. "Probably, and tired, and confused about why we're standing in the middle of nowhere instead of settling into a home." Sophia heard the bitterness in her voice and didn't care. "We're both confused about that." The man glanced at the Mercantile woman, who shrugged and went inside. Then he looked at Sophia again, really looked at her. "My name is Henry Hayes. I have a ranch about an hour's ride from here." He spoke carefully. "You and the little one could come out there while you figure out your next step. Separate room, proper bed meals, no strings. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to." Every instinct screamed danger going off alone with a strange man to an isolated ranch. But those same instincts had told her Frank Anderson was a good man because he'd written pretty letters. Why would you help us? Henry considered the question. Because someone should have helped you before now, and they didn't. And because babies shouldn't go hungry just because adults made bad choices. Emma had stopped crying and was staring at Henry with red-rimmed eyes, one fist in her mouth. I don't even know you. That's fair. We'll stop by Sheriff Morrison's office on the way out. He can vouch for me. If you don't feel safe after talking to him, I'll leave you be. It was the offer to walk away that decided her. All right. Sophia took a shaky breath. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Henry's fine. He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. My wagon's just there. The sheriff's office smelled like coffee grounds and old paper. Sheriff Morrison, grizzled more gray than brown in his beard, looked up when they entered. Henry Hayes. Don't usually see you in town on a Thursday. His eyes shifted to Sophia and Emma. This about the Anderson situation. It is. Henry set down the trunk. This is Miss Wilson. She came out to marry Frank, but Frank's long gone and she's stranded. Yeah, I heard. Morrison stood. Ma'am, I'm sorry. Frank Anderson was a piece of work. Henry offered us shelter at his ranch, Sophia said. He suggested I speak with you first. Morrison's eyebrows rose. He looked at Henry with something like approval. Smart. Ma'am, I've known Henry Hayes for 12 years. He's one of the most decent men in this territory. If he's offering help, it's genuine. That said, you're within your rights to be cautious. You want me to find you a place in town instead? Sophia looked down at Emma, who'd fallen into an exhausted sleep against her shoulder. Town meant Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. It meant working for room and board while caring for Emma. It meant staying where everyone knew her as the jilted bride. Or she could trust the quiet cowboy with gentle hands and honest eyes. Thank you, Sheriff, but I'll go with Mr. Hayes. He's good people, Morrison confirmed. Henry, you bring her back to town whenever she wants. No questions. Yes, sir. Henry picked up the trunk. Ready, Miss Wilson. The afternoon sun was brutal. Henry's wagon was simple but well-maintained with a canvas cover providing shade. He helped Sophia up onto the bench seat with more care than any man had ever shown her. How long have you had your ranch? Sophia asked as he climbed up and gathered the reins. About 8 years. Bought it from a family heading back east. He clicked his tongue and the horses started forward. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Good water, decent grazing. I run about 200 head of cattle. By yourself? Mostly. I hire extra hands during roundup. Rest of the time it's just me and the horses. Sophia tried to imagine that solitude. Don't you get lonely? Henry was quiet for a moment. Yes, ma'am, I do, but lonely's better than bad company. She couldn't argue with that. They rode in silence. Emma slept exhausted. The town fell away, replaced by open desert dotted with scrub brush. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the bright sky. Can I ask you something? Henry said. Of course. The baby. Is she yours? Sophia had expected this. My niece. Her parents, my sister, and her husband died of cholera 6 months ago. Emma's all I have left. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. The words came out harsh. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't change the fact that I can't support us in Boston on a seamstress's wages. Sorry doesn't make Frank Anderson a real person instead of a liar. No. Henry agreed quietly. It doesn't. They crested a small rise and he pulled the horses to a stop. Why are we stopping? Look. He pointed ahead. The valley below was a surprise of green in all that brown landscape. A creek wound through it lined with cottonwoods. The ranch buildings housed barn outbuildings, all simple but well kept. That's Hayes Ranch, Henry said. It's not much, but it's honest land. Water flows year-round, and it's quiet. Peaceful mostly. It's beautiful. Henry smiled just a small quirk at the corner of his mouth. Let's get you both home then. Home. Such a dangerous word. The ranch house was smaller than expected, 3 rooms. Henry helped her down, careful not to jostle Emma. The bedroom's through there. He nodded toward a door. Clean sheets. Changed them last week. Where will you sleep? I've got a cot in the barn. I sleep there most of the time anyway during calving season. I can't take your bed. You can and you will. His tone was gentle but firm. You've got a baby to care for. You need proper rest. He was already heading back for her trunk. The bedroom was simple but scrupulously clean. A bed with a real mattress, a washstand, a small dresser, a rocking chair by the window. Sophia laid Emma on the bed, surrounding her with pillows, then went back to the main room. Henry was lighting the stove. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and bacon. That works for anything. Sophia realized she hadn't eaten since early morning. Can I help? You can sit down before you fall down. He pulled out a chair. You've been traveling how long? 4 days on the train, another day on the stagecoach. Sophia sank into the chair. I thought I'd be sleeping in a real house tonight. I was right. Just the wrong house. Henry busied himself at the stove. Did Anderson write you many letters? 15 over 6 months. He seemed kind, honest. He wrote about his ranch, his dreams, his loneliness. He said he wanted a wife to build a life with. Children someday. A partnership. What did you write back? The truth. That I was a seamstress with no prospects. That my sister had died and left me with a baby I couldn't support alone. That I wasn't looking for romance, just stability. Safety. She watched Henry work. He said that was fine. He said Emma would be welcome. He said he'd be proud to raise her as his own. Bastard. The word was quiet but savage. Yes. Sophia appreciated his anger on her behalf. The worst part is I knew it was risky. Everyone told me I was crazy, but I thought maybe I could make it work. I'm good at making things work. I believe that. Henry set a plate in front of her. Woman who travels 2,000 miles with a baby to marry a stranger has backbone. Or desperation. Maybe both. Nothing wrong with that. They ate in silence. The beans were simple but hot and filling. Through the window, Sophia could hear the wind in the cottonwoods and distant cattle. Emma woke with a cry. Sophia started to rise, but Henry was faster. I'll get her. Finish eating. He disappeared into the bedroom and emerged with Emma in his arms, bouncing her gently. The baby stared at him with wide eyes, temporarily distracted. She needs to eat, Sophia said. But Henry was already settling into the rocking chair, still holding Emma. You have milk for her. In my bag. Glass bottles wrapped in cloth. He retrieved them with one hand, keeping Emma entertained with his other. When he handed Sophia the bottle, their hands brushed, and she felt calluses rough as tree bark. You're good with babies. Had younger siblings. Learned early. He returned to his plate. She's how old? 8 months next week. Sophia settled Emma in her lap and offered the bottle. The baby latched on desperately. She's been through so much already. I keep hoping she won't remember any of this. She won't remember the bad parts, but she'll remember feeling safe, feeling loved. Henry's voice was thoughtful. That's what sticks with kids. Not the circumstances, but how they feel. How do you know that? Experience. He didn't elaborate. Emma drank half the bottle before her eyes started drooping. Sophia carried her back to the bedroom, changed her, and tucked her into the center of the bed, surrounded by pillows. When she returned, Henry had washed the dishes and was banking the fire. I should let you rest, he said. You've had a brutal day. Wait. Sophia caught his arm. I need to understand something. Why are you doing this? Really? Henry looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. 5 years ago, my brother and his wife died in a barn fire. Left behind a little boy, my nephew. He was 3. His voice was steady, but she heard old grief underneath. I was supposed to take him. I was ready to. But my sister-in-law's family sued for custody. They were wealthy, connected. I was just a cowboy with a small ranch. Judge ruled in their favor. Oh, Henry. I haven't seen that boy since. Don't even know if they tell him about me. He met her eyes. So when I saw you standing there with that baby, looking lost and scared and determined not to cry, I saw another chance. Maybe I couldn't help my nephew, but I could help you help yours. That makes perfect sense. Good. He gently removed her hand from his arm. Get some sleep, Miss Wilson. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. He was at the door when she called after him. Sophia, my name is Sophia. Henry smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Good night, Sophia. Sophia didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under almost instantly. She woke once in the night to feed Emma, then fell back into dreamless darkness. Morning came with golden light and the smell of coffee. Sophia sat up disoriented. Arizona. The ranch. Henry. Emma was awake, making happy babbling sounds and trying to eat her own toes. Sophia changed her dresser and ventured into the main room. Henry was at the stove making flapjacks. He glanced over his shoulder. Morning. Coffee's on the table. You don't have to cook for us. But she poured herself a cup anyway. The coffee was strong and bitter and wonderful. I'm already cooking for myself. 2 more mouths barely makes a difference. He flipped the flapjacks. How'd you sleep? Better than I have in months. It was true. Despite everything, she'd felt safe here. Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. He slid a plate in front of her. So here's what I'm thinking. You and Emma stay as long as you need. Could be days, could be weeks. No rush. You can help around the house if you want cooking, mending, but only if you want to. This isn't payment. This is just neighborly. And if I never figure out a next step, then you stay. He said it like it was simple. I've got the space. Emma needs stability. You need time to breathe. People will talk. People already talk. I'm the strange bachelor who likes his own company too much. You'll be the mail-order bride who got abandoned. They'll make up stories no matter what we do. He poured himself coffee. Question is, do we care? Sophia thought about that. Back in Boston, she would have cared desperately. Reputation was everything. But Boston had also let her fall through the cracks. No, she said finally. I don't think I do care anymore. Good, Henry smiled. Now I've got to check on the herd this morning. Back by noon. You need anything before I go? Could I wash Emma's things and maybe take a bath? There's a wash tub in the shed behind the house. Pumps right outside. Bath water you'll heat on the stove, but there's plenty of firewood. He grabbed his hat. Make yourself at home, Sophia. That's what this place is now. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone with Emma and a strange new feeling she couldn't quite name. Not happiness too soon, but something like possibility. The next days fell into rhythm. Henry was gone most of each day, checking fences, moving cattle, doing the endless work of keeping a ranch running. Sophia cleaned the house not because she had to, but because she needed to do something while her mind processed everything. She mended Henry's shirts. She cooked meals simple, but better than beans every night. She explored the immediate area, always with Emma on her hip. And slowly, without quite meaning to, she started talking to Henry. Real talking. On the 3rd evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, while Emma played with measuring spoons, Sophia told him about her sister. Caroline was younger than me by 3 years, but she always seemed older, more confident. She knew exactly what she wanted: a husband, children, a home. I was the dreamer, the one who wanted to travel, maybe open my own dress shop someday. Sophia smiled at the memory. She used to tell me I had my head in the clouds. Did you? Henry was whittling something from a piece of scrap wood. Probably. But then Caroline got sick, and David, her husband, got sick, and suddenly the clouds didn't matter anymore. There was just Emma crying in a cradle, and me trying to figure out how to keep her alive. She watched the baby bang the spoons together. I failed at keeping them alive. I couldn't fail her too. You haven't failed anybody. Henry's voice was firm. You did what you had to do to protect her. That's not failure. That's love. Tears pricked Sophia's eyes. You're very kind to say that. I'm not kind. I'm honest. He held up what he'd been carving, a small wooden horse, rough but recognizable. For Emma when she's older. The tears won. Sophia wiped at her eyes. Sorry, I don't usually... Don't apologize for feeling things. Henry set down the wooden horse and his knife. You've been through hell. You're allowed to cry about it. So she did quietly while the sun set, and Emma babbled, and Henry sat beside her in comfortable silence until she was done. On the 5th morning, Sophia woke to find Henry already gone and a note on the table. Had to run into town for supplies. Back by evening. H. She spent the morning cleaning, then settled in the rocking chair with Emma and one of the 3 books on Henry's shelf. A worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, incongruous in a cowboy's house. She was reading aloud when she heard horses approaching. Sophia's stomach tightened. She set Emma in the playpen Henry had built and went to the window. 2 men on horseback, rough-looking, unshaven. They dismounted, and one banged on the door. Hello in there. We're looking for Henry Hayes. Sophia debated not answering, but they'd seen signs of habitation. Slowly, she opened the door a crack, making sure they couldn't see Emma. Mr. Hayes isn't here. Can I help you? The men exchanged glances. The taller one grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Well now, you must be the bride. Heard about you in town. Anderson's cast-off. Heat flooded Sophia's face, but she kept her voice level. I'm a guest of Mr. Hayes. He'll be back this evening. You're welcome to return then. Or we could wait. The shorter man started toward the door. No. Sophia moved to block the entrance. Her heart was hammering, but she refused to show fear. You need to leave. Awful unfriendly for a woman in your position. Tall man was still grinning. Heard you got no money, no prospects. Maybe you should be nicer to visitors. Behind her, Emma started to cry. Get off this property. Her voice was ice. Now. Or what? Short man laughed. You gonna shoot us? Hayes isn't here to protect you, sweetheart. No, but I am. All 3 turned. Henry stood 20 feet away, rifle in hand. His eyes were cold as January. Gentlemen, the word dripped contempt. You're on my land without permission, harassing my guest. Mount up and ride out, now. We didn't mean nothing, Hayes. Tall man had lost his grin. Just heard you had company. Now you've seen. Leave. They left fast, kicking their horses into a canter. Henry watched until they disappeared, then lowered the rifle and came to the door. You all right? I'm fine. Angry, but fine. Sophia stepped back. Emma's cries had tapered to hiccups. They knew about me. The whole town knows. Of course they do. Small town, big gossip. Henry set the rifle by the door. Those 2 are brothers, Jake and Pete Dawson. They're mostly harmless, but they've got mean streaks when they drink. I'll have a word with Sheriff Morrison. I'm sorry I brought trouble to your home. Henry turned to look at her. Sophia, you didn't bring trouble. Trouble found you through no fault of your own. There's a difference. Is there... She felt suddenly exhausted. Everywhere I go, I'm someone's cast-off, someone's burden, someone's joke. In Boston, I was the unmarried sister with a baby she couldn't afford. Here, I'm the abandoned bride. When does it end? When you decide it ends. Henry crossed to where Emma stood in her playpen, arms raised. He picked her up, and she immediately grabbed his nose. When you stop letting other people's words define who you are. Easy to say. Not easy at all, but necessary. He bounced Emma gently. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Sophia wasn't sure she did, but she nodded. I see a woman who traveled halfway across the country with a baby to make a better life. A woman who didn't fall apart when that plan failed, but kept going. A woman who stood in that doorway and faced down two men twice her size because she was protecting her family. His eyes were serious. That's who you are, Sophia. Not what happened to you, but what you did about it. Something cracked open in Sophia's chest, something that had been locked tight since Caroline died. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me. Henry smiled and handed her Emma. Come on, I brought supplies from town, including actual vegetables. Let's make a real dinner. That night, after Emma was asleep and the dishes were washed, they sat on the porch. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert air. Henry, Sophia said quietly, can I ask you something? Always. Why haven't you married a man with a ranch like this? Good character, kind disposition, you should have women lining up. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, after I lost my nephew, I went a little crazy for a while. Worked too hard, drank too much, pushed people away. By the time I pulled myself together, I'd earned a reputation as difficult, standoffish. And maybe I am. I don't do well with meaningless conversation. I don't enjoy social gatherings. I like quiet solitude, my own company. That doesn't sound crazy. That sounds honest. Most women want more than honesty. They want excitement, romance, pretty words. He shrugged. I don't have that in me. What I have is this ranch hard work and straightforward dealing. That's not enough for most people. Sophia thought about Frank Anderson's letters full of poetry and promises. Pretty words that meant nothing. It's enough for me, she said softly. Henry turned to look at her, and in the starlight his eyes were unreadable. Is it? Yes. And she meant it. They sat in silence, but it was different now, charged with possibility and unspoken questions. Finally, Henry stood. I should let you rest. Morning comes early. Henry. Yes. Thank you for today, for protecting us, for everything. You're welcome, Sophia. Sleep well. She watched him walk toward the barn, silhouetted against the stars, and wondered if maybe she'd finally found the place she was meant to be. But that thought was dangerous. She'd been wrong before. Inside, Emma slept peacefully, one fist curled against her cheek. Sophia climbed into bed beside her and closed her eyes, listening to the night sounds of the ranch settling around them. She should have fallen asleep immediately. But something kept her awake, a strange restlessness she couldn't name. After an hour of tossing, she got up for water. The main room was dark except for moonlight through the window. As she crossed to the pitcher, her hip bumped the small table, and something fell to the floor. A photograph. Sophia picked it up, intending to put it back. But the moonlight caught the image, and she froze. A woman. Beautiful, dark-haired, with eyes that held sadness even while smiling. She wore a wedding dress. Beside her stood a man who wasn't Henry, taller, broader, with a hard face. And between them, a little boy, maybe 3 years old, looking up at the woman with pure adoration. Sophia turned the photograph over. Faded ink on the back read, Sarah, Frank, and Thomas, June 1878. Her blood turned to ice. Sarah, Frank, Thomas. Frank Anderson had been married before. He had a son. And this photograph was in Henry Hayes's house. Sophia's mind raced. Henry's nephew, the 3-year-old boy he'd lost to his sister-in-law's family. Thomas. And Sarah, who was Sarah, Henry's sister-in-law. But the man in the photo was Frank, not Henry's brother. Nothing made sense. Unless Henry had lied about everything. Sophia's hands trembled as she set the photograph back on the table. She backed away slowly, her mind screaming warnings she should have heard 5 days ago. She didn't know this man. She'd trusted him because he had kind eyes and gentle hands and said the right things. Just like Frank Anderson had written the right words. How many times would she make the same mistake, Emma? She had to get Emma and leave. Now. Before Henry came back from the barn. Before the door opened. Henry stood silhouetted in the doorway, still dressed as if he hadn't gone to sleep at all. His eyes went to the photograph on the table, then to Sophia's face. "You found it," he said quietly. Sophia's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Who is Sarah, my brother's wife? And Frank?" Henry's jaw tightened. "That's complicated." Complicated. Sophia heard her voice rising and didn't care. "You have a photograph of Frank Anderson, the man who abandoned me in your house. The man you claim to have never met. And you call that complicated." "Sophia, let me explain. Did you know?" Her voice cracked. "When you saw me at that stagecoach stop, did you already know who I was? Did you know about Frank's letters to me? Was this whole thing planned?" "No." Henry stepped forward, hands raised. "I swear to you, I had no idea Frank had sent for another bride until I heard talk in town that morning. I went there hoping to warn you about him, but you'd already arrived, and he was already gone." "Why would you warn me? What is Frank Anderson to you?" Henry's face was hard in the moonlight. "Frank Anderson is my brother." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her hand finding the wall for support. "Your brother," she repeated numbly. "Half-brother. Same mother, different fathers. We haven't spoken in 6 years, not since—" Henry stopped his throat working. "Not since the fire. The fire that killed your brother and his wife." Sophia's mind was putting pieces together, pieces that made a horrible picture. "But Frank's not dead. Frank's alive. So who died in that fire, Henry?" "My other brother, James, and his wife Sarah." Henry's voice was flat, emotionless. "James was married to Sarah. They had a son, Thomas. Frank was supposed to be watching Thomas that night. He was drunk. He knocked over a lantern in the barn. By the time anyone noticed, the whole thing was ablaze. James and Sarah ran in to save the horses. They never came out." Sophia felt sick. "And Thomas?" "Thomas was in the house asleep. He didn't even wake up until it was over. Until his parents were dead, and Frank was on his knees in the dirt screaming." Henry's hands clenched into fists. "Frank disappeared the next day. Took Thomas to Sarah's parents in California and left him there. I tried to get custody, but Sarah's parents blamed me as much as Frank. Said the whole Hayes family was cursed. Said they'd never let another Hayes near that boy." "So you keep a photograph of the woman your brother killed." The words came out cruel, but Sophia was past caring. "Why, Henry? Why keep that here?" "Because I loved her." The confession was raw, torn from somewhere deep. "Sarah was my friend before she was James's wife. We grew up together, and after she married James, we stayed close. She was like a sister to me. And Thomas—" His voice broke. "Thomas was the closest thing I'll ever have to a son." Sophia stared at him, this man she'd trusted, this man whose house she'd slept in, whose food she'd eaten, whose kindness she'd believed in. And all of it was tangled up with Frank Anderson, the man who'd destroyed her life. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I know. The first day when you found out who I was, you should have told me Frank was your brother. I know. But you didn't. You let me stay here. You let me start to trust you. You let me think—" Her voice broke. "What was I supposed to think, Henry? That you're some kind of saint who helps strangers out of the goodness of his heart? Or that you're just like Frank, another Hayes man full of pretty lies?" "I'm not like Frank. How do I know that?" Sophia was crying now, angry tears that she couldn't stop. "How do I know anything about you is true? Maybe you planned this with him. Maybe you're the one who wrote those letters, and this is all some sick game you Hayes brothers play with desperate women." That's not... Henry stopped, his face going pale. You can't actually believe that. I don't know what to believe anymore. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself. I need you to leave. Sophia. Get out! Her voice was shrill, desperate. Get out of this house right now, or I swear I'll... All right. Henry's voice was quiet, defeated. All right, I'll go. But Sophia, please believe me, I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to help. I wanted to make up for what Frank did, for what my family did. I don't care what you wanted. Sophia turned her back on him. Just go. She heard his footsteps cross the room, heard the door open, then close, heard the sound of his boots on the porch fading into the night. And then she was alone with the moonlight and the photograph and the terrible knowledge that she'd been a fool twice over. Emma stirred in the bedroom, making small, sleepy sounds. Sophia went to her, picked her up, held her close. We have to leave, she whispered into the baby's soft hair. First thing in the morning, we have to leave. I don't care where we go. Anywhere but here. But even as she said it, Sophia knew the truth. She had nowhere to go. No money, no prospects, no options. The boarding house in town wouldn't take her without payment. Boston was 2,000 miles away, and Margaret had made it clear Sophia wasn't welcome. She was trapped. Again. And this time she had no one to blame but herself. Sophia sank into the rocking chair, still holding Emma, and stared out the window at the dark shapes of the barn and outbuildings. Somewhere out there, Henry was probably lying awake too, thinking about his brother and his dead sister-in-law and the nephew he'd lost. Part of her, a small treacherous part, wanted to believe his story. Wanted to believe he'd acted out of guilt and grief and a genuine desire to help. Wanted to believe he was different from Frank. But the photograph on the table said otherwise. A man didn't keep a picture of his dead sister-in-law unless he'd loved her. And maybe still did. And what did that make Sophia? A replacement, a substitute for the woman he couldn't have. No, she whispered fiercely. No, I won't be that. I won't be anyone's second choice, ever again. But as the night wore on and Emma fell back asleep in her arms, Sophia's anger began to cool into something worse, uncertainty. Because the truth was, Henry had been kind to her. He'd protected her from the Dawson brothers. He'd given her a safe place to sleep and food to eat, and asked for nothing in return. He'd carved a toy for Emma. He'd seen Sophia, really seen her in a way no one else ever had. Were those the actions of a man running a con, or the actions of a man trying desperately to atone for his family's sins? Sophia didn't know, and that not knowing was going to eat her alive. As dawn broke gray and cold over the desert, Sophia finally allowed herself to sleep, still sitting in the rocking chair with Emma in her arms. She didn't hear Henry return to the barn, didn't see him standing in the yard staring up at the house with an expression of such profound regret that it would have broken her heart if she'd seen it. And she didn't know that in his pocket Henry carried a letter he'd been meaning to give her for days, but hadn't found the courage to. A letter written in Frank Anderson's hand, addressed to Henry, admitting everything he'd done wrong and begging his brother to help the woman he'd abandoned if she ever showed up looking for him. A letter that might have explained everything if only Henry had shared it sooner. But now it was too late. The damage was done. And Henry Hayes, who'd spent 5 years learning to live with regret, was about to learn that some mistakes couldn't be fixed with good intentions and hard work. Some mistakes just had to be endured. Morning came too soon and brought no answers. Sophia woke with a crick in her neck from sleeping in the rocking chair, Emma heavy and warm in her arms. Through the window she could see the sun already climbing, painting the desert gold. It must have been past 7. She'd slept later than she had in years. Emma stirred and whimpered, hungry. Sophia carried her to the main room and stopped short. Fresh coffee sat on the stove, still hot. A plate of biscuits covered with a clean cloth, and beside them a folded piece of paper with her name written on it in careful script. Sophia's hands shook as she picked it up. Sophia? There's milk for Emma in the cold box out back. Eggs too if you want them. I'll be working the north pasture today. Won't be back until after dark. The rifle's by the door if you need it. You're safe here, I promise you that. Whatever else you believe about me, believe that, Henry." She crumpled the note in her fist. Safe. He promised she was safe. But how could she be safe in a house built on lies? Emma's whimpers turned to full cries. Sophia forced herself to move to heat a bottle to feed the baby. The routine helped. Changed diaper, clean dress, a few spoonfuls of mashed egg. Emma ate hungrily, smearing yolk across her face and laughing. At least one of them could still find joy in simple things. After breakfast, Sophia stood in the middle of the main room and tried to think clearly. She needed a plan. Staying here was impossible now. Every corner of this house reminded her of Henry's deception. But leaving required money she didn't have and a destination she couldn't name. Her eyes fell on the photograph still sitting on the table. In daylight, it looked different. Sarah's sad smile seemed to hold secrets. The little boy Thomas had Henry's eyes. Or maybe Henry had his. And Frank Anderson, the man in the picture, looked younger than she'd imagined. Almost handsome if you didn't know what he'd become. A drunk. A coward. A man who'd killed his own brother through negligence and abandoned his son out of shame. And Henry's half-brother. Sophia picked up the photograph, intending to throw it in the stove. Watch it burn, like Frank Anderson had burned down his family. But something stopped her. Maybe it was Sarah's eyes. Maybe it was the little boy who'd lost everything and had no say in any of it. Or maybe it was the fact that destroying the photograph wouldn't change what had happened. Wouldn't make Henry's lie any less true or her situation any less impossible. She set it back down carefully and went to pack her trunk instead. It didn't take long. She'd arrived with almost nothing and had accumulated even less. One change of clothes for her, a few things for Emma, the $3 she still had tucked in her corset. Not enough to get them anywhere. Not enough to start over. Not enough. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed and felt the weight of it all pressed down. She'd been so sure coming west was the answer. So certain Frank Anderson's letters meant safety and stability. And when that failed, she'd been equally certain Henry Hayes was different. Better. Trustworthy. She'd been wrong both times. What did that say about her judgment? Nothing good, she whispered to the empty room. Emma was playing on the floor with the wooden horse Henry had carved, babbling happily. She had no idea her whole world was about to change again. No idea that the man she'd started reaching for, the man she'd giggled at yesterday morning, was the brother of the man who'd destroyed their future. Sophia's throat tightened. Emma deserved better than this. Better than a mother who kept making the wrong choices, kept trusting the wrong people, kept dragging them both from one disaster to the next. Caroline would have known what to do. Caroline always knew. But Caroline was dead, and Sophia was alone, and the morning sun was climbing higher while she sat paralyzed with indecision. A knock at the door made her jump. Sophia's heart hammered. Henry had said he'd be gone until dark. Who else would come all the way out here? Another knock, firmer this time. "Miss Wilson, you in there?" A woman's voice. Sophia relaxed slightly and opened the door. The woman standing on the porch was maybe 60, iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a practical riding outfit that had seen better days. Her face was weathered but kind, and her eyes were sharp as they took in Sophia's appearance. "You look like you've had a rough night," the woman said bluntly. "I'm Margaret Hayes, Henry's mother." Of course she was. Sophia almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Mrs. Hayes." Just Margaret. Mrs. Hayes was Henry's grandmother, and she was a terror. I won't answer to it. She peered past Sophia into the house. "That the baby I've been hearing about? Emma. My niece. Pretty little thing. She looks healthy at least." Margaret's eyes returned to Sophia's face. "You going to invite me in? Or are we going to have this conversation on the porch where God and everyone can hear?" Sophia stepped aside. Margaret came in and looked around the main room with an expression that suggested she knew every inch of it. Of course, she did this had probably been her home once. "Coffee's still hot," Margaret said, helping herself to a cup. "Henry always did make it strong enough to strip paint." She sat at the table and gestured for Sophia to do the same. "Sit down, girl. You look ready to collapse." Sophia sat more out of confusion than obedience. "Did Henry send you?" "Henry doesn't know I'm here. Ran into him at dawn heading out to the north pasture looking like death warmed over. Didn't take much to guess you two had words." Margaret sipped her coffee. "He tell you about Frank?" "Last night. Or rather, I found out last night. He didn't exactly volunteer the information." "No, he wouldn't. Boy keeps things locked up tighter than a bank vault." Margaret set down her cup. "So now you're wondering if you can trust him. If this whole thing was some kind of setup. If he's as much a liar as Frank." "Yes," Sophia said simply. "Fair enough. You're entitled to wonder." Margaret leaned back in her chair. "Let me tell you a story, Miss Wilson. 28 years ago, I married a man named Robert Hayes. Good man, hard worker, but he drank too much and died too young. Left me with a 10-year-old son, Henry. 2 years later, I met Daniel Cooper. Charming, handsome, full of big dreams and bigger promises. We married fast and I got pregnant even faster. That baby was Frank." Sophia listened, trying to reconcile this calm recitation with the chaos in her own head. Daniel Cooper turned out to be everything Robert Hayes wasn't: lazy, mean, unfaithful. He'd disappear for weeks at a time, come home drunk and violent, spend whatever money I'd managed to save. Henry was 12 when Daniel first hit him, 14 when he finally fought back. Daniel left that night and never came back. Good riddance. Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were hard. "I raised those boys on my own after that. Henry practically raised Frank himself, truth be told. 10 years older patient as Job. He tried so hard to be the father Frank never had." "What happened?" Sophia asked quietly. "Frank grew up wild, charming like his father, but with a mean streak a mile wide when he drank, which was often." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Henry tried everything. Gave him work on the ranch, taught him responsibility, bailed him out of trouble more times than I can count. But some people can't be saved from themselves. Frank was one of them." Emma crawled over and pulled herself up on Margaret's leg. The older woman smiled and picked her up, settling the baby on her lap with practiced ease. "Then James came along," Margaret continued. "My third son. Different father, a good man who died of fever before James was born. James was like Henry in temperament. Steady, reliable kind. He married Sarah Mitchell when he was 22. Prettiest girl in 3 counties and smart as a whip. They had Thomas a year later." "Henry loved her," Sophia said. It wasn't a question. Margaret's eyes sharpened. "He tell you that last night. He said Sarah was like a sister to him. But I saw the photograph. The way he keeps it. That's not how a man looks at a sister." "No," Margaret admitted. "It's not. Henry loved Sarah before James ever did. But Sarah chose James, and Henry stepped aside because that's the kind of man he is. He loved her enough to want her happy, even if it wasn't with him. And after she married James, Henry did his damnedest to be a good brother to both of them. For 3 years it worked. Until the fire. Until the fire." Margaret's face aged 10 years in an instant. Frank was supposed to be watching Thomas that night. James and Sarah had gone to town for supplies, and Frank said he'd stay sober and keep an eye on the boy. But Frank never stayed sober. He was in the barn with a bottle and a lantern, and God knows what he was thinking, but the lantern fell. Place went up like kindling. Emma grabbed Margaret's collar, and the older woman absently kissed the baby's head before continuing. James and Sarah saw the smoke from half a mile away. They came racing back, and by the time they arrived, the whole barn was engulfed. Frank was outside screaming about the horses. James ran in to get them out. He had 6 horses in there. Good animals, expensive. Sarah ran in after him. Margaret's voice cracked. Thomas was in the house the whole time asleep. He never knew until it was over. Until his parents were dead, and his uncle was on his knees howling like an animal. Where was Henry? 20 miles away moving cattle. By the time word reached him and he got back, Frank was gone. Took Thomas and ran. Left a note saying he couldn't face what he'd done. Saying Thomas deserved better than the Hayes name. Margaret's hands tightened on Emma. Henry tried to find them. Tracked them all the way to California. But Sarah's parents, they blamed the whole family. Said Hayes' blood was cursed. Got themselves a fancy lawyer and convinced a judge that Henry was unfit. They had money connections. Henry had a small ranch and a brother who'd killed their daughter. That's not fair. No, it's not. But fair doesn't matter when you're poor and the other side has power. Margaret looked at Sophia directly. Henry came home destroyed. I thought I might lose him too. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Worked himself half to death every day like he could outrun the grief. It took him 2 years to come back to himself. And when he did, he was different. Quieter. More careful. Like he'd used up all his trust and had none left to give. Sophia thought about the man who'd offered her shelter without question. That doesn't sound like someone with no trust left. That's because you reminded him of something. Margaret set Emma down gently, and the baby crawled back to her toys. Frank sent Henry a letter about 6 months ago. First contact in 5 years. Said he was sorry, said he'd tried to be better but kept failing. Said he'd written to a woman in Boston, promised her marriage and a home, but he'd lost his nerve and run like he always did. He begged him to help her if she ever showed up. Sophia's breath caught. He knew I was coming. Not exactly. Frank's letter was rambling, half drunk probably. He mentioned a woman from Boston but no name, no details. Henry thought it was just more of Frank's delusions, until he heard talk in town that morning about Anderson's mail-order bride arriving on the afternoon stage. Margaret leaned forward. Henry rode into town to warn you about Frank, to tell you the truth before you got hurt worse. But by the time he got there, you'd already arrived and Frank was already gone. And you were standing there with a baby looking lost and terrified, and Henry saw his chance. His chance for what? To do what he couldn't do for Thomas. To protect a child from the mess his family created. To maybe make up for losing his nephew by helping you keep yours. Margaret's voice softened. Was he wrong not to tell you about Frank immediately? Yes. Did he lie to you? Yes. But did he do it to hurt you or use you? No, Miss Wilson. That boy has been trying to atone for his brother's sins for 5 years. You just gave him an opportunity to finally do it. Sophia felt tears burning behind her eyes. How am I supposed to trust that? You're not. Not yet. Trust isn't given in a day, it's earned over time. Henry knows that. He's prepared to earn it if you'll let him. Margaret stood brushing off her skirt. But here's what I came to tell you, Miss Wilson. You want to leave, I'll take you into town myself right now. I'll help you find work, a place to stay, whatever you need. You don't owe Henry anything just because he showed you kindness. You're free to go. I have $3. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about choice. Margaret met her eyes. You came west because you thought you had no choices left. But you do. You always do. You can leave and start over somewhere else somehow. Or you can stay and see if Henry Hayes is the man I believe he is. The man who carved your baby a toy. The man who stood between you and the Dawson brothers. The man who's loved one woman his whole life and never told a soul because it would hurt his brother. Sophia's throat was so tight she could barely speak. What if I make the wrong choice again? Then you make it, and you survive it, and you keep going because that's what women like us do. Margaret headed for the door, then paused. You know what I see when I look at you? Miss Wilson, I see a woman who traveled 2,000 miles with a baby to make a better life. Who faced down her fear and her pride to accept help from a stranger. Who found out that stranger lied and didn't fall apart, she got angry. She demanded truth. She protected her child. She smiled. That's not a woman who makes wrong choices. That's a woman who makes hard choices and lives with them. There's a difference. After Margaret left, Sophia sat at the table for a long time, the photograph of Sarah and Frank and Thomas staring up at her. She thought about Henry's face last night, when she'd accused him of planning this with Frank. The way he'd gone pale, like she'd struck him. The way he'd left without another word of defense. She thought about the wooden horse. The way Henry had held Emma, bouncing her gently until she stopped crying. The way he'd stood in the doorway with that rifle. His voice cold and dangerous. You're on my land, without permission. She thought about the way he'd looked at her on the porch under the stars and asked, is it, when she said his honesty was enough? Like he couldn't quite believe someone might value straightforward dealing over pretty words. And she thought about Frank Anderson's letters full of poetry and promises that had meant nothing. Henry had never promised her anything except a safe place to stay while she figured things out. He'd never asked for gratitude or payment or anything in return. He'd just offered shelter, and when she'd found out the truth, he'd accepted her anger without deflecting or making excuses. That didn't make the lie okay. But maybe it made it understandable. Sophia picked up the photograph one more time, studied Sarah's face, trying to see what Henry had seen in her, what he probably still saw when he looked at this image late at night when he couldn't sleep. Sarah looked kind. She looked like someone who'd have been a good friend, someone who'd have laughed easily and loved deeply and died far too young. And little Thomas, who'd lost everything and didn't even know his uncle was still fighting for him 5 years later. Slowly, carefully, Sophia walked to the bedroom and unpacked her trunk. She didn't know if this was the right choice. Didn't know if staying was brave or foolish, or some combination of both. But Margaret was right about one thing: she was tired of running. Tired of letting fear make her decisions. If she left now, she'd spend the rest of her life wondering if Henry Hayes was truly as good as he seemed. Wondering if she'd thrown away her last chance at stability because she was too afraid to give trust a second chance. And Sophia Wilson was done living with regrets. By the time Henry rode in after dark, Sophia had cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread and the last of the bacon, but it was hot and ready. She heard his horse outside, heard him pause at the door, like he wasn't sure he should come in. She opened it before he could decide. Henry stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking exhausted and wary. I can sleep in the barn again tonight if... Your mother came by this morning. His eyes widened. My mother... She told me about Frank's letter, about why you came to town that day, about Thomas and Sarah and everything that happened. Sophia stepped back from the doorway. Come inside, Henry. Your dinner's getting cold. He didn't move. You're still here. I'm still here. Why? Sophia considered the question, considered all the reasons she could give, practical ones about money and options and nowhere else to go. But none of those were the real answer. Because I think you're a good man who made a mistake, she said finally. And I think I'm a good woman who deserves a second chance at trust. And maybe we can both figure out how to move forward from here. Henry's throat worked. For a moment, she thought he might cry. Then he stepped inside, set his hat on the peg, and looked at her with something like hope in his eyes. I should have told you about Frank immediately, he said. I know that. I was afraid you'd leave before I had a chance to prove I wasn't like him. That Hayes blood didn't automatically make me a liar or a drunk or a coward. And then, every day that passed made it harder to tell you, and I kept thinking, tomorrow, I'll tell her tomorrow, and then you found that photograph and... He stopped, shook his head. I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm so damn sorry. I know. And she did. She could hear the truth in every word. Sit down, eat. We'll talk after. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Emma sat between them in her high chair, smearing beans across her face and babbling happily. Every so often, Sophia caught Henry watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. After dinner, while Sophia washed dishes, Henry got down on the floor and played with Emma. The baby squealed with delight, crawling after him as he rolled a ball back and forth. It was such a simple scene, so domestic, and it made Sophia's chest ache with something she didn't want to name. "Tell me about Thomas," she said quietly. Henry went still. Emma grabbed his hand, and he let her his thumb gently stroking the baby's tiny fingers. He looked like Sarah. Same dark hair, same eyes. But he had James's smile. Henry's voice was soft with memory. Smart as anything. Used to follow me around the ranch asking a million questions. Why do cows eat grass? Why is the sky blue? Where does the sun go at night? He smiled faintly. I told him I'd teach him to ride when he turned 4. Promised I'd get him his own horse when he turned 5. How old would he be now? 8. Almost 9. Henry looked down at Emma. I wonder if he remembers me at all. If Sarah's parents told him about his real family, or if they made up some story. If he knows his father was a hero who died trying to save horses, or if they told him the truth that James died because his brother was a drunk fool. You don't know that's what they told him, don't I? They blamed all of us. My mother, me, anyone with Hayes blood. They weren't wrong to. Frank was our family, our responsibility. We should have seen how bad he'd gotten, should have kept him away from Thomas that night. Should have, his voice cracked, should have done a lot of things differently. Sophia dried her hands and came to sit beside him on the floor. You can't carry Frank's guilt for him. Someone has to. He sure as hell won't. They sat there while Emma played, pulling herself up on Henry's knee and then plopping back down with a giggle. The lamplight made gentle shadows on the walls. Can I ask you something? Sophia said finally. Anything. Did you love Sarah? Truly, love her not just as a sister? Henry was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, yes. I loved her from the time I was 20 years old and she was 17. But she was in love with James, and James was good and decent, and would never have hurt her. So I kept my mouth shut, stepped back, let them be happy. He looked at Sophia directly. I never told her, never told James, never told anyone until last night when you demanded the truth. And I don't regret that. Sarah and James had 3 good years together. Thomas had parents who loved him. That's worth more than my wanting something I couldn't have. That must have been hard. It was. But loving someone doesn't mean you get to have them. Sometimes it just means you want them to be happy, even if it's not with you. He paused. That's why I understood when you came here for Frank. You weren't looking for love, you were looking for safety, partnership, someone to help you build a life for Emma. There's nothing wrong with that. It's honest. More honest than pretty words about romance and passion that fade as soon as real life gets hard. Sophia thought about that, about how she'd dreamed of opening her own dress shop, of traveling, of a life bigger than the one she'd had, and how all those dreams had died with Caroline, replaced by the simple, desperate need to keep Emma alive and safe. What do you want, Henry? She asked. Not for me, not to make up for Frank or Thomas or Sarah. What do you actually want for yourself? He looked at her for a long moment. I want this house to feel like a home again, instead of a place I sleep. I want to wake up knowing there's someone else here who might need me. I want to teach Emma to ride when she's old enough. I want... He stopped, swallowed hard. I want to stop being so damn lonely all the time. That's not much to ask for. No, but for a long time I thought I didn't deserve even that much. Sophia understood that feeling. The guilt that ate away at you, telling you that you'd failed everyone who'd ever depended on you. That you didn't deserve happiness or peace or anything good. Your mother said you're a good man, she said quietly. She said you've been trying to atone for 5 years, that I gave you an opportunity to finally do it. My mother talks too much. Maybe, but she's not wrong, is she? Henry met her eyes. I don't know if I'm a good man, but I'm trying to be. And I swear to you, Sophia, I will never lie to you again. About anything. Even if the truth is hard or painful or makes you want to leave. You deserve honesty. You deserve someone who keeps their word. I believe you. Do you really? I'm still here, aren't I? Sophia smiled faintly. I could have left this morning. Your mother offered to take me into town, help me find work, but I chose to stay. That has to mean something. It means everything. Henry's voice was rough. Thank you for giving me another chance, for not judging me by my brother's actions, for... He stopped, cleared his throat. Thank you. Emma chose that moment to crawl into Sophia's lap and yawn hugely. Bedtime. I should get her down, Sophia said, standing carefully with the baby in her arms. Will you? She hesitated. Will you come back inside tonight? Sleep in your own bed? The barn can't be comfortable. Are you sure? I'm sure. This is your home, Henry. I'm just a guest here. No. He stood too, looking at her intently. You're not a guest. Not anymore. This is your home too, for as long as you want it to be. The words hung between them, full of possibility and promise, and the fragile beginning of something that might become trust. All right, Sophia said softly. Then this is home. For both of us. She took Emma to bed and changed her into a nightgown, singing softly while the baby's eyes grew heavy. Through the open door, she could hear Henry moving around the main room, banking the fire, putting things away for the night. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the sounds of a home where two people were learning to exist together, finding their rhythm, figuring out how to build something new from the ruins of what had come before. When Emma was finally asleep, Sophia stood by the bed for a moment, looking down at the baby's peaceful face. So much innocence. So much trust that the world would provide what she needed. Sophia had lost that trust somewhere along the way. Lost it when Caroline died, when Frank Anderson disappeared, when she'd realized how truly alone she was in the world. But maybe, just maybe, she could find it again. Here in this small ranch house with a man who'd loved quietly and lost terribly and still had the courage to try again. Sophia. Henry's voice was quiet from the doorway. Everything all right? She turned. He stood silhouetted against the lamplight from the main room, and for a moment she couldn't see his face clearly. Could only see his shape, tall and solid and somehow reassuring. Everything's fine, she said. I was just thinking. About what? About second chances. About whether we get to choose them, or if they just happen to us. Henry considered that. I think we make them. Every day we choose to try again, to trust again, to hope again. That's us creating our own second chances. That's a nice way to look at it. It's the only way I know how to keep going. They stood there in the quiet, with Emma sleeping peacefully between them, and the night settling over the ranch like a blanket. Henry. Yes. Thank you, Hank, for everything. For helping us. For being honest even when it was hard. For... She struggled to find the right words. For giving me a reason to believe good men still exist. He crossed the room, slowly stopping a few feet away. Close enough that she could see his face clearly now, see the hope and fear and something else warring in his expression. You gave me a reason to believe I could be one, he said quietly. That maybe I'm not just my brother's keeper, or my mistakes, or my regrets. That maybe I'm just Henry Hayes, and that might be enough. It's enough, Sophia whispered. It's more than enough. And as they stood there in the lamplight, with Emma sleeping peacefully, and the desert night wrapped around them, Sophia felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not certainty. Not the illusion of safety she'd chased all the way from Boston. Just simple, honest hope that maybe tomorrow would be better than today. That maybe she and Henry and Emma could figure out how to be a family, not because of pretty promises or desperate circumstances, but because they'd all chosen to try. It wasn't much. But for tonight, it was enough. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Almost because Sophia kept waiting for something to go wrong. She'd learned the hard way that peace never lasted. But Henry was true to his word. Every morning, he'd leave for the day's work, and every evening, he'd return with some small thing wildflowers he'd found by the creek, a smooth stone for Emma to play with, once a book of poems he'd ordered from town, because he'd noticed her reading his Shakespeare. "You didn't have to do this," Sophia said, turning the book over in her hands. Poetry by Emily Dickinson barely published the pages, still crisp and new. "I know." Henry hung his hat on the peg. "But you seem to enjoy the sonnets, and I thought you might like something different. If you don't, I love it." And she did. It had been so long since anyone had noticed what she liked, what she needed, what might make her smile. "Thank you." He ducked his head, almost shy. "You're welcome." They were learning each other slowly. Sophia discovered that Henry sang to the horses, when he thought no one was listening, always the same 3 songs, slightly off-key. That he read every night before bed, usually by lamplight in the main room, so he wouldn't disturb her and Emma. That he had a scar on his left hand from a rope burn that had gotten infected when he was 16, and he still flexed those fingers unconsciously when the weather changed. And Henry learned that Sophia talked to Emma constantly, narrating everything she did as if the baby understood every word. That she braided her hair differently depending on her mood, loose when she was content, tight when she was worried. That she had nightmares sometimes and would wake gasping, and on those nights she'd sit by the window until dawn rather than trying to sleep again. They didn't talk about the future. Didn't make plans or promises or assumptions. They just lived day by day, finding their way. Until the morning Jake Dawson came back. Sophia was hanging laundry when she heard the horse. She turned, shading her eyes against the sun, and her stomach dropped. Jake Dawson sat astride a rangy sorrel, grinning that same tobacco-stained grin. But this time he was alone, and this time he didn't dismount. "Morning, Missy. Hayes around?" "No." Sophia's hand went to her apron pocket where she'd taken to carrying a small knife for cutting vegetables. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. "He's working the South Range. Won't be back until evening." "That's a shame." Jake leaned forward in his saddle. "I was hoping to have a word with him. About compensation." "Compensation for what?" "Well, now that depends on how you look at it." His grin widened. "See, my brother Pete and me, we were thinking about that day we came by. How Hayes ran us off his land. How he embarrassed us in front of a lady. And we got to thinking that maybe we deserve an apology. Or maybe something more tangible." Sophia's grip tightened on the laundry basket. "Mr. Hayes doesn't owe you anything. You were trespassing and you were rude. He had every right to ask you to leave." "Ask?" Jake laughed. "He didn't ask, sweetheart. He threatened us with a rifle. That's assault near as I can figure. Could report him to the sheriff for that." "Please do. Sheriff Morrison already knows what happened. I'm sure he'd be very interested in your version of events." Jake's smile faded slightly. "You got a smart mouth on you. Someone ought to teach you to be more respectful to your betters." "My betters?" Sophia set down the basket and stood straighter. "You come onto private property uninvited, make threats, and then call yourself my better. You must have a very high opinion of yourself, Mr. Dawson." His face darkened. For a moment, she thought he might dismount, might do something stupid. But then he seemed to think better of it. Instead, he spat into the dirt near her feet. "You tell Hayes we'll be back. Tell him we're not the kind to forget a slight. And tell him he might want to keep a closer eye on his cattle. Lot of things can happen to livestock when a man's not watching." He wheeled his horse and rode off, leaving Sophia standing in the yard, with her heart hammering and her hands shaking. She didn't tell Henry immediately. Didn't want to worry him. Didn't want to be the cause of more trouble. But that night at dinner, when he asked how her day was, she couldn't lie. "Jake Dawson came by this morning." Henry's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Alone." "Yes." He said, Sophia repeated the conversation word for word, watching Henry's face grow progressively darker. I think he was just trying to scare me. I don't think he'd actually do anything. You don't know the Dawson brothers like I do. Henry set down his fork. They've got a reputation for holding grudges. 2 years ago, they poisoned a neighbor's well over a fence dispute. Killed all the man's chickens. He couldn't prove it was them, but everyone knew. What do? I'll ride into town tomorrow, talk to Sheriff Morrison. Make sure he knows they're making threats. Henry's jaw was tight. And I'll talk to some of the other ranchers. The Dawsons are cowards, they won't try anything if they know people are watching. But Sophia saw the worry in his eyes and felt guilt settle heavy in her stomach. This was her fault. If she hadn't come here, hadn't brought her problems to Henry's door, he wouldn't be dealing with this now. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For bringing trouble. For making your life more complicated. For Sophia. Henry reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her intentionally since that night she'd learned the truth about Frank. His palm was rough and warm. Listen to me. The Dawsons have been looking for an excuse to start something for years. This isn't about you. This is about them being small, mean men who get their kicks from making others afraid. You didn't cause this. They did. But if I wasn't here? If you weren't here, this house would still be empty, and I'd still be half alive instead of fully living. Don't you dare apologize for that. Sophia looked at their joined hands and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Henry, I know. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. I know it's too soon. I know you came here running from one bad situation, and you don't need me complicating things with feelings you might not want. But I need you to know these past 2 weeks have been the best I've had in 5 years. Coming home to you and Emma, having dinner together, hearing you laugh when Emma does something silly, it matters to me. You matter to me. You matter to me too, Sophia said quietly. That's what scares me. Why? Because the last time I let someone matter, I lost them. Caroline, David, even Frank, in a way, I lost all of them. And I don't know if I can survive losing someone else I care about. Henry was quiet for a moment. Then he squeezed her hand gently and let go. I can't promise you won't lose me. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise I won't leave by choice. I won't lie to you or abandon you or make you feel like caring about me was a mistake. That's all I've got to offer, Sophia. My word and my presence and the truth always. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't the kind of grand romantic declaration she'd read about in books. But it was honest and real, and somehow that made it more precious than any pretty words could be. That's enough, she said. That's more than enough. They sat there in the lamplight, not touching, but connected by something stronger than physical contact. By understanding, maybe. By the slow, careful building of trust. Emma babbled from her playpen, breaking the moment. Sophia stood to get her, and life went on. But something had changed between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. Henry rode into town the next morning before dawn. He came back just after noon with Sheriff Morrison beside him. Miss Wilson. Morrison tipped his hat. Henry tells me the Dawsons are making trouble again. Jake came by yesterday making threats. Sophia wiped her hands on her apron. About the cattle. And about reporting Henry for assault, which is ridiculous. Henry was protecting his property. And he had every right to. Morrison dismounted. The Dawsons have been pushing boundaries all over the county. Judge Harmon's been waiting for someone to file formal complaints. Between you and Henry and 3 other ranchers I talked to this morning, I think we've got enough. Enough for what? Sophia asked. To run them out of the territory, or at least make it so uncomfortable they'll want to leave on their own. Morrison's smile was grim. Sometimes the law takes a while to catch up with men like that, but when it does, it comes down hard. He and Henry talked for a few more minutes about legal procedures and witness statements. Sophia only half listened, distracted by the implications. If the Dawsons were facing real consequences, they might get desperate. And desperate men did stupid things. After Morrison left, Henry found Sophia in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with more force than strictly necessary. "What's wrong?" "I'm worried. If the Dawsons think they're going to be run out, they might do something rash. They might—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't give voice to all the terrible scenarios playing out in her head. "They might." Henry didn't sugarcoat it. "That's why I'm going to be more careful. Keep the rifle with me at all times. Check the fences more often. And I want you to promise me something." "What?" "If anyone comes to this house when I'm not here, anyone at all, you take Emma and you hide in the root cellar. There's a bolt on the inside. You lock it, and you don't come out until you hear my voice. Understand?" The seriousness in his tone frightened her more than Jake's threats had. "You really think they'd hurt us?" "I think desperate men are unpredictable, and I won't take chances with your safety or Emma's. Promise me, Sophia." "I promise." But promising and doing were different things, and 3 days later, Sophia learned exactly how different. It was mid-afternoon, and storm clouds were building in the west, turning the sky the color of a bruise. Henry had ridden out at dawn to check on some strays in the north pasture. He should have been back by now, but sometimes work took longer than expected. Sophia wasn't worried. Not yet. Emma was napping when she heard hoofbeats, multiple horses coming fast. Her stomach clenched. Henry always rode alone, and never that quickly, unless something was wrong. She ran to the window, and her blood turned to ice. 5 men on horseback riding hard toward the house. She recognized Jake and Pete Dawson in front, but the other 3 were strangers. All of them looked angry. Sophia didn't hesitate. She scooped Emma from her cradle. The baby woke with a startled cry and ran for the root cellar. It was accessed through a trap door in the kitchen floor, hidden under a rug. She yanked the rug aside, hauled open the door, and climbed down the ladder with Emma clutched to her chest. The cellar was dark and cool, and smelled of earth and stored vegetables. Sophia pulled the trap door shut above her and shot the bolt home just as she heard boots on the porch. "Hayes?" Jake's voice loud and slurred. He'd been drinking. "Get out here, Hayes. We need to have a conversation." More footsteps. Something crashed, probably furniture being overturned. "He ain't here, Jake." That was Pete. "Place is empty." "Then we wait. And while we wait, maybe we help ourselves to whatever he's got. Call it compensation for our trouble." More crashing, the sound of dishes breaking. Emma started to cry, and Sophia pressed her hand gently over the baby's mouth, whispering desperately, "Shh, sweetheart. Shh. Please be quiet. Please." Emma's cries softened to whimpers. Above them, the men were ransacking the house. Sophia could hear them laughing, making crude jokes. The smell of whiskey drifted down through the floorboards. "What about that woman?" one of the strangers asked. "The one who was so high and mighty." "Probably ran off." Jake's voice was ugly. "Probably figured out Hayes ain't worth sticking around for." "Shame. She was pretty. Would have liked to teach her some manners." Sophia's skin crawled. She held Emma tighter, breathing through her mouth to stay quiet. The cellar seemed to shrink around them. How long would the men stay? What would they do when Henry came home and found them here? What if they hurt him? The thought sent panic shooting through her. Henry, with his gentle hands and quiet voice, and eyes that saw her when no one else ever had. Henry, who'd lost so much already. If something happened to him because of her. Someone's coming. Pete's shout cut through her spiraling thoughts. "About damn time!" Jake's voice was eager. "Everyone ready!" Footsteps running, the sound of guns being cocked. Sophia's heart stopped. Henry was riding into an ambush. She wanted to scream to warn him, but opening the cellar door would give away her position, would put Emma in danger. And Henry had made her promise to stay hidden no matter what. But she couldn't just let him die. Sophia made a decision in the space of a heartbeat. She set Emma down on a pile of burlap sacks and pressed her finger to her lips. "Stay here, baby. Stay quiet. I'll be right back." Then she climbed the ladder and threw open the trap door. The main room was destroyed. Furniture, overturned dishes smashed. Henry's books scattered across the floor. 5 men stood at the windows with rifles watching the yard. None of them heard her emerge behind them. "Henry, it's a trap!" Sophia screamed at the top of her lungs. "Don't come in!" 5 heads whipped around. Jake's face contorted with rage. "You stupid bitch!" He lunged for her, but Sophia was already moving. She grabbed the iron skillet from the stove, still hot from lunch, and swung it with all her strength. It connected with Jake's temple with a sickening crack. He went down hard. Pete raised his rifle, but a shot from outside shattered the window beside him. Glass exploded inward, and Pete dove for cover. "Anyone moves, they're dead." Henry's voice cold and lethal. "Drop your weapons, now!" For a frozen moment, nobody moved. Then Pete's rifle clattered to the floor. The 3 strangers followed suit, hands raised. Jake was groaning on the floor, blood running from his scalp. Sophia stood over him with the skillet still raised, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Henry appeared in the doorway, rifle leveled his face harder than she'd ever seen it. Behind him were Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies, all armed. "Good timing, Hayes," Morrison said, surveying the destruction. "Though looks like Miss Wilson had things handled." "She did." Henry's eyes found Sophia's across the wreckage. "Are you all right?" Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice. Then Emma's wail rose from the cellar, frightened and alone, and Sophia dropped the skillet and ran. She scooped the baby up and held her tight, pressing her face into Emma's soft hair, while the tears finally came. Henry was beside her in an instant, wrapping his arms around both of them. "You're safe. You're both safe. It's over." "I was so scared," Sophia sobbed. "I thought they'd hurt you. I thought—" "I know, but I'm fine. We're all fine." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "You were supposed to stay hidden. They were waiting to ambush you. I couldn't. I had to warn you. You could have been killed. So could you." Henry stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, short and incredulous. "You hit Jake Dawson with a frying pan. I didn't know what else to do. You probably saved my life." He touched her face gently. "Thank you. You saved mine first. Seems only fair." Morrison appeared at the top of the cellar stairs. "Miss Wilson, I'm going to need your statement, but take your time. Get yourself together first." It took 2 hours to get everything sorted. The Dawson brothers and their friends were arrested and hauled off to jail. Morrison and his deputies took statements from both Sophia and Henry. 2 neighboring ranchers showed up, alerted by the sound of gunfire, and helped Henry begin cleaning up the destruction. By the time everyone left, the sun was setting, and Sophia was exhausted beyond words. Emma had cried herself to sleep from all the excitement. The house was still a mess, but at least it was theirs again. Henry built up the fire while Sophia put Emma to bed. When she came back to the main room, he was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of his books, trying to straighten pages. "Some of them can be saved," he said quietly. "Others are too damaged." Sophia knelt beside him and picked up the volume of Shakespeare. The spine was broken, pages torn. "I'm so sorry, Henry. They're just books." But his voice said otherwise. "They can be replaced." "They shouldn't have to be." Anger surged through her again. "Those men had no right to come here to destroy your things, to threaten us. But they did, and we survived." Henry set down the book he was holding and turned to face her. "Sophia, do you understand what you did today? You could have stayed hidden, should have stayed hidden, but you chose to risk yourself to warn me." "Of course I did." "Why?" The question hung between them. Sophia knew what he was really asking, knew what her answer would mean. "Because I care about you," she said simply. Because the thought of you getting hurt because I wasn't brave enough to help was unbearable. Because... She stopped, swallowed hard. Because somewhere in the past few weeks, you stopped being the man who offered me shelter and became someone I can't imagine living without. Henry's breath caught. Sophia. I know it's too soon. I know I'm probably being foolish. I know caring about people has only led to loss and pain. But I can't help it, Henry. I can't help caring about you. He reached out and cupped her face in his rough, gentle hands. You're not being foolish. And it's not too soon. I've been waiting my whole life for someone to look at me the way you're looking at me right now. How am I looking at you? Like I matter. Like I'm not just the sum of my mistakes and my family's sins. Like maybe I'm enough exactly as I am. Tears stung Sophia's eyes. You are enough. You're more than enough. You're... Her voice broke. You're everything I didn't know I needed. Henry kissed her, then soft and careful and sweet. It wasn't desperate or passionate. It was tender, reverent, like he was sealing a promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. I love you, he said quietly. I know it's fast, and I know we've both been hurt, and I know you might not be ready to hear it. But after today, after watching you risk everything to save me, I can't keep it inside anymore. I love you, Sophia Wilson, and I love Emma like she was my own, and I want to build a life with you, not because of circumstances or convenience or making up for the past, but because I choose you. Every day I choose you. Sophia couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so instead she kissed him again, pouring everything she couldn't say into that kiss. All her fear and hope and the terrifying, wonderful feeling of falling in love when she'd thought she'd never risk her heart again. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I love you too, she whispered. I didn't want to. I tried not to, but I do. I love you, Henry Hayes. He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Marry me. What? Marry me. For real this time, not some mail-order arrangement with a stranger. Marry me because you love me and I love you, and Emma deserves parents who chose each other. He took her hands. I know I'm not much. Just a cowboy with a small ranch and a complicated family history. But I swear to you, Sophia, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know you're loved. You and Emma both. Sophia looked at this man who'd saved her when she had nothing, who'd been honest even when it cost him, who'd stood between her and danger without hesitation, who'd lost so much and still had the courage to love again. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Henry pulled her close and held her tight, and Sophia felt something she'd thought was lost forever certainty. Not about what tomorrow would bring, or whether life would be easy, or whether they'd face more trouble down the road, but certainty that whatever came, they'd face it together. And that was all she needed. They set the wedding for 2 weeks later, which Margaret declared was scandalously fast, but then immediately started planning anyway. Sophia suspected Henry's mother had been waiting for this moment since the day she'd found Sophia still at the ranch. You'll need a proper dress, Margaret announced, showing up the morning after Henry's proposal with fabric samples and a measuring tape. I know a seamstress in Riverton who owes me a favor. She can have something ready in 10 days if we get the measurements to her today. I don't need anything fancy, Sophia protested, but Margaret waved her off. Every bride needs a proper dress. Even ones getting married for practical reasons started out wanting pretty things. She paused, studying Sophia's face. Though I don't think this is just practical anymore, is it? No, Sophia admitted. It's not. Margaret smiled, and for the first time Sophia saw where Henry got his rare warm smile from. Good. That boy's been alone too long. He deserves happiness. So do you. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Henry spent his mornings working the ranch and his afternoons in town, making arrangements, talking to the preacher, filing papers at the courthouse, ordering supplies for the small reception Margaret insisted they have. Sophia cleaned and mended, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that she was actually doing this. actually marrying a man she'd known for less than a month. But then Henry would come home and smile at her across the dinner table, or she'd catch him singing to Emma while he washed dishes, and all her doubts would quiet. This was right. Different from what she'd planned, faster than she'd ever imagined, but right in a way Frank Anderson's careful letters had never been. On the 5th day, a letter arrived. Henry brought it in from town, his face carefully blank. "It's from California. From Sarah's parents." Sophia's stomach dropped. She took the envelope with shaking hands. The return address was written in elegant script, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Mitchell, San Francisco. "Do you want me to open it?" Henry asked quietly. "No, I need to." She broke the seal and pulled out 2 sheets of expensive stationery covered in the same elegant handwriting. "Mr. Hayes," she read aloud, "we received your letter informing us of your upcoming marriage. We also learned from Sheriff Morrison's correspondence regarding the recent criminal proceedings that you have taken in a woman and infant child. After much discussion and prayer, we have decided it is time to address a matter we have avoided for too long." Sophia looked up at Henry. His face had gone pale. "Keep reading," he said hoarsely. "Thomas speaks of you often. He asks why his Uncle Henry stopped visiting, why we moved so far away, why he never gets to see his other grandmother. We have tried to explain in ways a child might understand, but the truth is, we cannot adequately explain what we ourselves did out of grief and anger. We blamed you and your family for our daughter's death. That blame was unjust. Frank was responsible for his actions, not you. You were never anything but kind to Sarah and James. You tried to help Thomas when we took him away. We robbed you of your nephew, and Thomas of his uncle, because we needed someone to punish for our loss. We have been wrong, Mr. Hayes. Terribly, unforgivably wrong." Sophia's voice cracked, but she pushed on. "Thomas is 8 now, about to turn 9. He is a bright, loving boy who deserves to know his family. If you are willing, if you can forgive us for the years we have stolen, we would like to arrange a visit. Thomas should meet his Uncle Henry. He should meet his grandmother. And if your new wife is as good a woman as Sheriff Morrison suggests, perhaps Thomas should meet her as well. A child can never have too many people who love him. Please write to us with your answer. Respectfully, Charles and Patricia Mitchell." The silence after Sophia finished reading was absolute. Henry stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, his breathing shallow and fast. "Henry," Sophia set down the letter. "Say something. They want to bring him here." His voice was barely a whisper. "After 5 years. After telling me I wasn't fit to be near him. They want to just bring him here like nothing happened." They apologized. They admitted they were wrong. "An apology doesn't give me back 5 years." Henry's voice rose. 5 years of birthdays I missed. 5 Christmases. 5 years of him growing up thinking I abandoned him. "How do I get that back, Sophia? How?" Emma started to cry, frightened by Henry's raised voice. Sophia picked her up and held her close, watching Henry struggle with emotions too big to contain. "You don't get it back," she said quietly. "You can't, but you can have the future. You can have Thomas in your life from now on, if you want him." "Of course I want him," Henry's voice broke. "I've wanted him every single day for 5 years. But what if—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "What if he doesn't remember me? What if he's afraid of me? What if I've built up this idea of who he is and he's completely different now and I don't know how to talk to him anymore?" Sophia shifted Emma to one hip and crossed to Henry, taking his hand. "Then you learn. You start over. You build a relationship with the boy he is now, not the toddler he was then. That's what love does, Henry. It adapts. It grows. It doesn't give up just because things are hard." "I don't know if I can do this." But his fingers tightened around hers. "Yes, you do. You've already done it with me and Emma. We showed up in your life unexpected and scared, and you didn't turn us away. You learned us. You adapted. You loved us even when it was complicated." She squeezed his hand. "Thomas is your blood, Henry. If you could do it for us, you can do it for him." Henry pulled her close, Emma squished between them and buried his face in her hair. His shoulders shook, and Sophia realized he was crying. She held him tighter, one hand stroking his back, while Emma patted his chest with her small hands. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I know, but you're not alone. Not anymore." They stood like that until Emma started squirming and complaining. Henry pulled back, wiping his eyes roughly. "I need to write back to them. Tell them yes, before I lose my nerve. Want me to help? Please." They sat at the table together, Emma playing at their feet, and composed a response. Henry's hand shook so badly, Sophia ended up writing most of it while he dictated. They kept it simple. Yes, Thomas could visit. After the wedding, when things were settled. They'd prepare a room for him and make sure he felt welcome. And yes, they forgave the Mitchells. Holding on to anger served no one, least of all Thomas. When it was done and sealed and ready to post, Henry stared at the envelope like it might explode. "This changes everything," he said. "Does it? We're about to get married, start our life together. And now suddenly there's going to be a child. Not a baby like Emma, but a real kid with opinions and needs and years of history we weren't part of. What if that's too much? What if you didn't sign up for—" "Henry." Sophia cut him off firmly. "I fell in love with a man who carved toys for my niece and kept his dead sister-in-law's photograph because he couldn't bear to forget her. A man who lost his nephew and never stopped grieving. Did you really think I didn't know that if given the chance you'd move heaven and earth to get Thomas back? This doesn't change anything about us. It just makes our family bigger." "Our family." Henry tested the words. "You, me, Emma, and Thomas. If he wants to be part of it. We can't force him, but we can offer him a place where he's loved and wanted. The rest is up to him." Henry kissed her, then soft and grateful. "How did I get so lucky?" "You offered a desperate woman and a baby a place to stay. Seems like you earned it." "No." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Luck. Pure luck. And I'm not taking it for granted." The wedding dress arrived 3 days before the ceremony. Margaret brought it herself, making Sophia try it on immediately, despite her protests about bad luck. "That's only if the groom sees it," Margaret said, lacing up the back. "And Henry's out checking fences. He won't be back for hours." The dress was simpler than anything Sophia had worn in Boston, but more beautiful. Cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs fitted at the waist and falling in soft folds to her ankles. The seamstress had added tiny buttons down the back, each one covered in matching fabric. "It's perfect," Sophia breathed, looking at herself in the small mirror. "It is." Margaret adjusted the collar. "You look happy, child. Really happy. Not just content or relieved, but happy." "I am." Sophia turned away from the mirror. "I didn't think I could be again after Caroline died. After everything fell apart. But Henry, he makes me want to hope again. Want to believe good things can last." "They can. Not always and not easily, but they can." Margaret's eyes were distant. "I had that with Robert Henry's father. Only 6 years before he died, but they were good years. I've had longer relationships that meant less. It's not about time, Sophia. It's about truth, about showing up for each other when things are hard, about choosing each other every day. Henry said something similar once. He would. That boy learned early that pretty words don't mean much if the actions don't match. Daniel Cooper taught him that, if nothing else. Margaret began unlacing the dress. "You'll be good for him, and he'll be good for you. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't let the hard times make you forget why you chose each other. When Thomas comes and things get complicated, and they will get complicated, remember this feeling. Remember why you said yes." "I will," Sophia promised. The night before the wedding, Henry came home early. He found Sophia sitting on the porch steps, watching Emma toddle around the yard, newly confident on her feet. "You're back soon," Sophia said as he sat beside her. "Couldn't focus. kept thinking about tomorrow. He watched Emma bend to examine a rock with intense concentration. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Sophia admitted. "Not about marrying you, about everything it means, about building a life together, about Thomas coming and not knowing how to be what he needs, about being a wife and a mother and wondering if I'm good enough at either." "You're more than good enough. You have to say that. You're about to marry me." "I'm saying it because it's true." Henry took her hand. "You know what terrifies me? Waking up one day and realizing you've figured out you could do better. That you settled for me because you didn't have options, and now that you do, you'll leave." Sophia turned to stare at him. "Henry Hayes, you listen to me. I am not settling. I could have left a dozen times. Your mother offered, Sheriff Morrison offered. I had chances. I stayed because I wanted to, because you're kind and honest and you see me as a person, not just a problem to solve. Because when you look at Emma, you see your nephew and a second chance. Because you carved a wooden horse for a baby who isn't yours and read poetry by lamplight and sing off-key to your horses." Her voice softened. "I'm not settling, Henry. I'm choosing. There's a difference." He kissed her knuckles. "I'm choosing too. Every day I'm choosing you." They sat in comfortable silence while Emma played. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow they'd stand in front of a preacher and promise forever. Tomorrow they'd become a family in the eyes of God and the law. "My mother's bringing the ring tomorrow," Henry said quietly. "It was my grandmother's. She wanted you to have it." "I didn't expect a ring." "I know, but you should have one. Something that shows the world you're not just staying with me out of necessity. You're my wife by choice." "I don't need jewelry to prove that." "Maybe not, but I need to give it to you anyway." He looked at her seriously. "Let me do this right, Sophia. Let me give you a wedding that means something. Let me make promises I intend to keep. Let me—" He stopped struggling for words. "Let me show you that not all men lie, that some of us mean what we say." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. "You've already shown me that." "Then let me keep showing you. For the rest of our lives." Emma toddled over and collapsed into Sophia's lap, exhausted from her adventures. Henry reached over and smoothed the baby's hair, his touch infinitely gentle. "She's going to call me Papa, isn't she?" he said softly. "Probably. Is that all right?" "It's more than all right. It's everything I never knew I wanted." He looked up at Sophia. "I meant what I said that first day, about making up for what Frank did, for what I couldn't do for Thomas. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about that. It started being about you, about Emma, about the family we're building together, not to replace what I lost, but to create something new, something ours." "Ours," Sophia repeated. "I like the sound of that." They put Emma to bed together, taking turns singing lullabies until her eyes fluttered closed. When they returned to the main room, Henry pulled Sophia into his arms. "Last night, as an unmarried woman," he murmured against her hair. "Last night sleeping in separate rooms," she countered. "That too." She felt him smile. "I know it's not traditional you staying here before the wedding. People in town probably have opinions about that. Let them talk. I'm done living my life based on what other people think." "Good. Because I'm not nearly proper enough for polite society." "Neither am I. Guess we're well matched." They swayed gently in the lamplight, not quite dancing, but moving together in a rhythm that felt natural. Outside the window, stars were beginning to appear. Tomorrow, those same stars would shine on them as husband and wife. Tomorrow, everything would be different and exactly the same. "I love you," Sophia whispered. "I love you too." Henry pulled back to look at her face. "Thank you for saying yes, for giving me a chance, for seeing past my mistakes to who I'm trying to be. Thank you for offering shelter to a desperate woman and a crying baby, for not running when things got complicated, for loving us when we needed it most." "Always," he promised. "From now on, always." The wedding took place in Riverton's small church with maybe 30 people in attendance. Most were neighbors and townsfolk who'd heard the story and wanted to show support. A few came out of curiosity. Margaret sat in the front row holding Emma, who'd been dressed in a little white gown for the occasion. Sophia walked down the aisle alone, no father to give her away, no family except the one she was creating. But when she saw Henry standing at the altar in a new shirt and pressed trousers, his hair neatly combed and his eyes locked on her, like she was the only person in the world, she didn't feel alone at all. Preacher Davis kept the ceremony short and simple. The vows were traditional love, honor, cherish, for better or worse, richer or poorer in sickness and health. Sophia meant every word. So did Henry. She could see it in his eyes when he slipped his grandmother's ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a single small diamond. Not expensive, but precious. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Davis said with a smile. "Henry, you may kiss your bride." Henry cupped Sophia's face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something sacred he'd been trusted to protect. The small congregation applauded, and Emma let out a happy shriek from the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen," Davis announced, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Henry Hayes." Mrs. Hayes. Sophia Wilson was gone. In her place was Sophia Hayes, wife and mother and woman, who'd survived everything life threw at her and come out stronger. She liked the sound of that. The reception was held at the ranch. Neighbors brought food, and someone produced a fiddle. Margaret had decorated the porch with wildflowers and set up tables in the yard. It was simple and beautiful, and exactly what Sophia would have wanted if she'd known to want it. Henry barely left her side all afternoon. They danced awkwardly because neither of them were skilled dancers, and ate and accepted congratulations from people who'd started as strangers, but felt like community now. Emma was passed from person to person, soaking up attention and charming everyone with her gap-toothed smile. As the sun began to set and guests started leaving, Sheriff Morrison pulled Henry aside. Sophia watched them talk, saw Henry's expression shift from relaxed to serious. When Morrison left, Henry came back to her side. "What was that about?" she asked. "The Dawson brothers. Their trial's set for next month. Morrison wanted to make sure we'd both testify." "Of course we will." He also said they're probably looking at significant jail time. Assault, trespassing, destruction of property, attempted murder, the judge isn't going to go easy on them. Good. Sophia felt no sympathy. Those men had tried to hurt her family. They deserved whatever punishment they got. Henry pulled her close. "It's really over. That whole chapter is done. Now we get to start the next one. The one where we're married and have a daughter and are about to have a nephew come visit. Sounds complicated? Sounds perfect." The last guests left as darkness fell. Margaret took Emma home with her for the night. "Every couple deserves a wedding night alone," she'd said firmly despite Sophia's protests. Now it was just Henry and Sophia standing in their yard under a blanket of stars. "So," Henry said, his voice suddenly nervous, "we're married." "We are." Sophia took his hand. "Having second thoughts?" "Never. Just realizing I have no idea what happens now." "Neither do I. Guess we'll figure it out together." They went inside to their home, not his anymore, or hers temporarily, but theirs together. Henry banked the fire while Sophia lit the lamp in the bedroom. When he came to the doorway, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, suddenly shy. "We don't have to," he started. "I want to," she interrupted. "I'm just nervous. It's been a long time, and I never Caroline and David were so in love, and I always wondered what that felt like. If I'd ever find someone who looked at me the way David looked at her. And then Frank's letter seemed promising, but I knew it wasn't love, just practicality. And now I'm here with you, and I feel so much, and I don't know how to—" She stopped, frustrated with her rambling. Henry crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Sophia, look at me." She did. "There's no rush, No expectations. We have the rest of our lives. Tonight can just be about being together, holding each other, sleeping in the same bed. The rest will happen when it happens. You're not disappointed. How could I be disappointed? I get to fall asleep next to my wife. I get to wake up knowing you chose me. That's more than I ever thought I'd have. Everything else is just extra. Sophia felt something release in her chest. This man, this impossibly patient, gentle, understanding man. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. He stood and offered his hand. Come on, Mrs. Hayes. Let's get some sleep. Tomorrow we start building our life together. She took his hand and let him pull her up. They undressed with backs turned, still shy with each other. When they finally climbed into bed, Henry pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Henry. Thank you. For everything. For giving me a home when I had nowhere to go. For loving Emma. For being patient with me. For being exactly who you are. His arms tightened around her. Thank you for trusting me. For staying when you had every reason to leave. For making this house feel alive again. For giving me a reason to hope. They drifted off like that, wrapped in each other, the first night of their marriage, peaceful and perfect in its simplicity. Outside, the desert stretched away in all directions under the stars. Inside, two people who'd been broken by life had found each other and were beginning to heal. Tomorrow they'd wake up as husband and wife. Tomorrow they'd start the hard work of building a life together. But tonight, they simply held each other and slept content in the knowledge that they were no longer alone. 3 months passed in a blur of adjusting and learning and building the rhythms of married life. Sophia discovered that Henry snored softly when he slept on his back, that he had a terrible habit of leaving his boots exactly where someone could trip over them, and that he made coffee strong enough to wake the dead every single morning without fail. Henry learned that Sophia talked in her sleep sometimes, that she reorganized the kitchen cupboards when she was anxious, and that she hummed the same 3 songs while she worked the same ones he sang to the horses. They learned each other in all the small, intimate ways that mattered. And somewhere in those 3 months, the careful politeness of newlyweds gave way to something deeper, something that felt permanent. Emma was walking now, toddling everywhere with fierce determination. She'd started calling Henry Papa, just like Sophia predicted, and the first time she'd done it, Henry had actually cried. He tried to hide it, but Sophia had seen, had wrapped her arms around him, and whispered, "She's yours now. We both are." The letter from the Mitchells came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Henry opened it at the breakfast table, his hands shaking slightly. "They're coming," he said, his voice strange. "Next month. They'll arrive on the 15th and stay for a week. They're bringing Thomas." Sophia set down her coffee cup. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, excited, like I might throw up." He looked at her with wild eyes. "What if he hates me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if—" "Henry." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Breathe. We have a month to prepare. We'll get his room ready. We'll plan activities he might enjoy, and we'll just be ourselves. That's all we can do. What if being myself isn't enough? It will be. You're his uncle. You loved him when he was small, and you've never stopped. That counts for something." Henry squeezed her hand. "I couldn't do this without you." "Good thing you don't have to." They spent the next month preparing. Henry built a bed frame for Thomas's room, sanding it smooth and carving small horses into the headboard. Sophia sewed curtains and a quilt. Margaret donated books she'd saved from when her sons were young. They stocked the pantry with things boys liked, cookies and jam and extra bacon. But no amount of preparation could calm Henry's nerves as the 15th approached. He was jumpy, distracted, working himself into exhaustion every day to avoid thinking about it. The night before the Mitchells were due to arrive, Sophia found him in the barn long after dark, uselessly reorganizing tack that was already organized. "Come inside," she said gently. It's late. I can't sleep anyway. He didn't look at her. Might as well be productive. Henry, look at me. He did finally, and she saw the raw fear in his eyes. What if he doesn't remember me? He whispered. What if I'm just a stranger to him now? Then you start over. You build something new. Sophia crossed to him and cupped his face in her hands. But I don't think he's forgotten you. Children don't forget people who loved them. They might not remember details, but they remember the feeling. And you loved that boy with everything you had. I still do. I know. And tomorrow you get to show him. Now come to bed. You need rest. The Mitchells arrived mid-afternoon the next day. Sophia watched from the porch as the hired carriage pulled up, her hand resting protectively on Emma's head. Beside her, Henry had gone rigid as stone. Charles Mitchell emerged first, a distinguished man in his 60s with gray hair and tired eyes. He helped his wife down a small woman in an expensive traveling dress. And then a boy climbed out, lanky and dark-haired and exactly 8 years old. Thomas. Henry made a sound low in his throat. Sophia touched his arm gently. Go on. He walked down the porch steps slowly, like he was approaching something fragile that might shatter. Charles Mitchell stepped forward and extended his hand. Mr. Hayes, thank you for agreeing to this. Henry shook his hand mechanically, but his eyes were locked on the boy standing behind the Mitchells. Thomas was staring at Henry with an expression Sophia couldn't quite read, curiosity mixed with something else. Recognition, maybe, or hope. Thomas, Patricia Mitchell said, gently nudging the boy forward. This is your Uncle Henry. Do you remember him? The boy took a tentative step forward. You're taller than I remember. Henry let out a choked laugh. You're a lot taller, too. Last time I saw you, you barely came up to my knee. I don't remember that. Thomas frowned. But I remember your voice. You used to read me stories about horses. I did. Henry's voice was thick. Your favorite was about the wild Mustang who learned to trust. I still have that book. Thomas looked at his grandparents, then back at Henry. Grandmother said you wanted to keep me but couldn't, that it wasn't your fault we had to move away. That's right. She said my papa died trying to save horses, that he was brave. The bravest man I ever knew, Henry said quietly. He was my brother, and I loved him. And your mama, she was one of the kindest people I've ever met. They both loved you so much, Thomas. The boy's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't remember them much, just feelings, like being warm and safe. Grandmother says that's because they loved me. They did, so much. Henry crouched down to be at eye level with Thomas. And I know I'm basically a stranger to you now, but I want you to know I never stopped thinking about you. Never stopped hoping I'd get to see you again. You're my nephew, and I love you, even if you don't remember loving me back. Thomas studied Henry's face for a long moment. Then, without warning, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Henry's neck. Henry caught him holding tight, and Sophia saw his shoulders shake. Patricia Mitchell was crying quietly into her husband's shoulder. Charles cleared his throat roughly. When Thomas finally pulled back, he looked at Henry seriously. Grandmother says you have a new family now, a wife and a baby. I do. Henry stood and turned toward the porch. Would you like to meet them? Thomas nodded. Henry took his hand tentatively, like he wasn't sure he was allowed, and led him to where Sophia waited with Emma. Thomas, this is my wife Sophia, and this little one is Emma. She's about a year old now. Thomas looked at Sophia with curious eyes. Are you nice to Uncle Henry? Sophia bit back a smile. I try to be. Is he nice to you so far? I think so. He didn't yell when I got dust on my good shoes getting out of the carriage. Well, dust happens on a ranch. Nobody yells about dust here. Good. Thomas turned his attention to Emma, who was staring at him with wide eyes. Can I touch her? Gently, Sophia said, kneeling down with the baby. She's little still. Thomas reached out and patted Emma's head carefully. The baby grabbed his finger and squealed happily. Thomas laughed, a sound so pure and joyful that Sophia felt her throat tighten. "She likes me," Thomas said wonderingly. "She does," Henry agreed. "She's a good judge of character." They got the Mitchells settled in the spare room while Thomas explored the house with barely contained excitement. He found the room Henry had prepared and stopped in the doorway, eyes wide. "This is for me." "While you're visiting, yes," Henry said. "I carved the horses myself. Thought you might like them." Thomas ran his hand over the headboard, tracing each carved figure. "They're beautiful. Did you make the quilt too?" "Sophia did. She's good at things like that." "It's nice." Thomas turned to look at Henry. "Can I really stay here for a whole week?" "If you want to, we'd love to have you." "I want to." Thomas said it with such certainty that Henry's eyes went bright again. "Grandmother said you have horses. Real ones, not just carved." "6 of them. Want to meet them before dinner?" "Yes." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the barn. Thomas peppered Henry with questions about the horses, the cattle, how ranching worked, what Henry did all day. Henry answered each one patiently, and Sophia watched from the barn doorway as the distance between them slowly closed. Not gone entirely, 5 years had created gaps that couldn't be bridged in an afternoon, but narrowing, healing. That night, after Thomas was in bed and the Mitchells had retired to their room, Henry and Sophia sat on the porch in the darkness. "He called me Uncle Henry," Henry said quietly. "Not Sir or Mr. Hayes. Uncle Henry. Like he remembered. Maybe he does. In his heart, if not his head. He asked if he could come back. If maybe next summer he could visit for longer." Henry's voice broke. "Sophia, they're giving him back to me. Not legally, not like I wanted 5 years ago, but they're letting me be his uncle again. Letting him know me. Because they see what I see. That you're a good man who loves that boy, that Thomas deserves to know his family. I thought I'd lost him forever. Thought that chapter of my life was closed for good. And now—" He stopped, overcome. Sophia took his hand. "Now you get to be his uncle. Get to watch him grow up. Get to be part of his life. That's worth celebrating, Henry." "I know. I just wish James and Sarah were here to see it. Wish they could see what a good kid he turned out to be despite everything." "They know. Wherever they are, they know. And they're proud of him. Proud of you for never giving up." They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. "Thank you," Henry said finally. "For what?" "For being here. For helping me prepare. For making Thomas feel welcome. For—" He struggled for words. "For making this possible. I couldn't have done this alone. Couldn't have had the courage to face them, to risk being disappointed again. But knowing you were here, that Emma was here, that I had a family to introduce him to, it made it easier. Made me braver. You've always been brave, Henry Hayes. You just needed a reason to see it." The week passed too quickly. Thomas and Henry were inseparable, making up for lost time. They worked on the ranch together, Thomas learning to feed the horses and muck out stalls and check fences. Henry taught him to throw a rope and ride properly and identify animal tracks. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, while Henry told stories about James and Sarah, helping Thomas connect to the parents he'd lost. Patricia and Charles watched it all with a mixture of joy and regret. On the 4th day, Patricia pulled Sophia aside while they were preparing dinner. "Thank you," the older woman said quietly, "for loving Henry, for giving him a stable home to bring Thomas into. When we heard he'd married, we worried it might be someone harsh who wouldn't welcome our grandson. But you're kind, patient, you're good for him." "He's good for me too," Sophia said honestly. "I came here desperate and alone with a baby I couldn't support. Henry gave us a home, gave us safety, gave us love when we needed it most. If I can help him reconnect with Thomas, it's the least I can do." "It's more than you know." Patricia's eyes were distant. "We've kept Thomas from his family for 5 years because we were angry and grieving and needed someone to blame. We've stolen years Henry can never get back. Years Thomas should have had with his grandmother, his uncle, his family. I don't know if we can ever make that right. You're making it right now. By bringing him here. By letting him know Henry. By admitting you were wrong. That takes courage. Or just guilt that finally outweighed pride. Patricia smiled sadly. But whatever the reason, I'm grateful. Thomas deserves to know where he comes from. Deserves to know he's loved by more than just us. On the last night of their visit, they had a special dinner. Margaret joined them, meeting her grandson for the first time in 5 years. She didn't cry when she saw him, but it was a near thing. Thomas was shy with her at first, but Margaret had a way about her. By the end of dinner, he was sitting beside her asking about what his father was like as a boy. James was the careful one. Margaret said her eyes warm with memory. Always thinking things through, making sure everyone was taken care of before he took care of himself. And Henry. She smiled at her son. Henry was the serious one, quiet, thoughtful. He'd spend hours watching the horses, learning their moods, figuring out how to gentle the wild ones. Your father used to joke that Henry understood animals better than people. Do you, Thomas asked Henry, understand animals better? Sometimes, Henry admitted. Animals are straightforward. They don't lie about what they want or how they feel. People are more complicated. Aunt Sophia isn't complicated, Thomas said with the certainty of childhood. She's nice all the time. Sophia laughed. I have my moments. Ask your Uncle Henry about the time I reorganized his entire workshop, and he couldn't find anything for a week. You reorganized it by function, Henry protested. I organized by frequency of use. It was chaos. It was logical. It was maddening. Thomas giggled, delighted by their banter. Emma, not wanting to be left out, banged her spoon on her high-chair tray and shrieked happily. The noise and laughter filled the small house until it felt like it might burst from joy. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Henry found Sophia sitting by Thomas's door. What are you doing? He whispered. Listening, making sure he's really asleep. She stood and took Henry's hand, leading him to their bedroom. Once the door was closed, she turned to him. How are you feeling about tomorrow? Like my heart's being torn in half. Henry sat on the edge of the bed heavily. I just got him back and now I have to let him go again. Not let him go, let him leave. There's a difference. He's coming back next summer. And maybe Christmas if the Mitchells agree. You're not losing him, Henry. You're just learning to love him from a distance. I hate distance. I know. Sophia sat beside him. But it's better than nothing. Better than the 5 years you had before wondering if you'd ever see him again. You're right. I know you're right. It just hurts. Of course it hurts. Love always hurts a little. But it's worth it, isn't it? Henry pulled her close. It's worth everything. The morning they left was hard. Thomas clung to Henry, tears streaming down his face. I don't want to go, he sobbed. I want to stay here with you and Aunt Sophia and Emma. I know, buddy, I know. Henry held him tight, his own voice rough. But your grandparents need you. They love you too. And you've got school and friends in San Francisco. You can't just leave all that. But I'll miss you. I'll miss you too, every single day. But you'll come back in the summer, right? We'll write letters. And maybe at Christmas your grandparents will bring you back for a visit. Promise. I promise. You're stuck with me now, Thomas. I'm not letting you disappear again. Charles Mitchell stepped forward, his face kind. We'll take good care of him, Henry. And we'll bring him back. You have my word. They loaded into the carriage, Thomas's face pressed against the window as they pulled away. Henry stood in the yard long after the dust had settled, staring at the empty road. Come inside, Sophia said gently, taking his arm. He'll be back before you know it. 8 months feels like forever. Then we'll fill it with life. We'll work the ranch and raise Emma and write letters to Thomas and make plans for his next visit. We'll build the life we want, Henry, together, And when Thomas comes back, he'll see how much you love him by how well you've taken care of everything he'll be part of." Henry turned to look at her, this woman who'd shown up desperate and scared and somehow become his whole world. "How did you get so wise?" "Necessity. And maybe loving you taught me some things." She smiled. "Come on. Emma needs her afternoon nap, and you promised to fix the gate on the north pasture." "Always something needs fixing on a ranch. That's life, isn't it? Always something needs fixing. Something needs tending, something needs love and attention. But that's what makes it worth living." They went inside together. Emma, between them and the house, welcomed them back with the smell of bread baking and coffee still warm on the stove. Outside, the desert stretched away in all directions under the endless sky. But inside these walls, they had everything that mattered. 2 months later, Sophia woke feeling strange. She made it outside before losing her breakfast in the bushes. Henry found her there, pale and shaking. "You all right?" "I'm fine, just my stomach being unreliable." But even as she said it, she knew with a certainty that made her heart race. Henry studied her face. "Sophia, I'm pregnant." She said it out loud for the first time and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. "I'm pregnant, Henry." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he whooped, actually whooped, and picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "We're having a baby." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "Should I not have done that? Did I hurt you? Should you be resting?" "Henry, I'm pregnant, not made of glass." But she was laughing, giddy with the news and his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy." He cupped her face in his hands. "Sophia, I don't even have words. A baby. Our baby. Yours and mine. And Emma's sibling. And Thomas will be an older cousin." Sophia felt tears streaming down her face. "We're going to need a bigger house. I'll build one. I'll build whatever you need, whatever our family needs." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you. Thank you for choosing me, for staying, for building this life with me, for giving me more than I ever dreamed of having. Thank you for finding me that day at the stagecoach stop, for offering shelter when I had nowhere to go, for loving Emma like she was yours, for being exactly who you are, honest and kind and steady and true." They stood in the morning sun holding each other while Emma played in the dirt nearby, and the horses nickered in the barn, and life went on all around them. The future stretched out uncertain and full of possibility. There would be hard days ahead, babies to raise, a ranch to run, a nephew to stay connected with across the distance. There would be challenges and setbacks and moments of doubt. But they would face all of it together, and that made everything possible. 6 months later, on a warm spring evening, Sophia gave birth to a baby boy. Henry was with her the whole time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, refusing to leave, even when Margaret tried to shoo him out. "He's perfect," Henry breathed, cradling his son for the first time. "He's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Sophia asked tiredly from the bed. Henry looked at her, his eyes bright with tears and joy and love beyond measure. "James, after my brother, if that's all right with you." "It's perfect." Sophia smiled. "James Hayes. Welcome home, little one." Margaret took the baby so Sophia could rest, and Henry climbed into bed beside his wife, pulling her close. "I love you," he whispered. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You took a broken man and helped him become whole again. Gave him a family when he thought that chapter of his life was over. I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it." Sophia's eyes were already closing, exhausted from labor. "You're my home, Henry Hayes. You and Emma and James and Thomas, you're all my home, and I'm never letting that go. You don't have to. We're yours. Always." Outside, the sun set over the desert in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Inside, a family slept, husband and wife, toddler and newborn, all tangled together in the small bedroom of a ranch house that had once felt empty, but now overflowed with love. Somewhere in San Francisco, a 9-year-old boy was probably already asleep, dreaming of horses and summer visits, and the uncle who carved wooden toys, and never stopped loving him. And in heaven, if such a place existed, maybe James and Sarah Hayes looked down on it all and smiled knowing their son was loved and their family scattered and rebuilt, and different from what they'd imagined was finally whole again. The mail-order bride who'd been abandoned at a stagecoach stop had found her way home after all. Not to the life she'd planned, but to something better. Something real. Something built on truth and trust, and the kind of love that grows slowly, carefully rooted deep enough to weather any storm. And the cowboy who'd offered shelter to a desperate woman and a crying baby discovered that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as burdens. That opening your home means opening your heart. That the family you choose can matter just as much as the family you're born into. They had chosen each other, and that choice, made in hope and fear and desperate faith, had led them exactly where they belonged. Home.